So, in our talk today, in our event today, we're going to be talking about medical writing, managing medical writing. This is a particular kind of academic scientific writing. And what we do at Bentham is we help researchers to achieve their potential. So, you are here, I hope, to gain some practical experience-based training in the issues that researchers face every day. In particular, how to turn your research into an effective article, how to write up and publish your fantastic research in a high impact factor journal like one of the Bentham Science portfolio, for example. So we've been working at Bentham with a range of other partners recently, like the World Health Organization, UNESCO, other publishers like Frontiers, like Nature, and consultancy companies like ResMed, Medical Economics, providing data, providing content, providing access to our research in medical subdisciplines to help these organizations gain a better picture of global trends in health. And as you'll see a little bit later, Bentham has some unique content, especially around oncology, especially around medical patents, that you may very well want to gain access to for your researchers and for your research organizations. But let's begin by talking about medical writing. And let's have a think for a moment about what's unique about medical writing, medical research writing. Well, if you're a doctor or a healthcare researcher or a clinician and you're listening to this, you'll be thinking, well, I get this completely, because of all of the fields of research, of all of the STM, science, technology, medicine, and mathematics fields of research, it's medical and healthcare research where we find that researchers are often the busiest. They've got competing time demands. You might be working in a hospital, you might be working as a practicing pharmacist, as well as having to publish your research. So that puts an extra layer of pressure on researchers across this particular subject area. We see this, extremely busy researchers with competing time demands. Articles that we see published need to be generally accessible, though, and have a clear, immediate message. Healthcare research, as well, is one of those fields of research that gets read by people across the whole spectrum. So not just people working in research, other people, ordinary people, people with an interest, maybe in the clinical problem or the diagnosis or the drug that you're talking about, will also be reading the work. So for that reason, often medical articles have to be more accessible with a clear, immediate message. And we're looking at a very large and dynamic and ever-changing literature as well. There's lots to keep up to date with in the medical research field. There's about 30,000 medical research articles, medical and healthcare research articles that get published every month. So lots and lots of new information to synthesize and collate, as well as being extremely busy and as well as having competing time demands. This is the issue. These are the issues that medical researchers often face. So there's a sheer volume of information. There's a range of different audiences that we have to pitch that information at, who will be digesting the content. The speed at which this field is changing, as well as the demands of the public, policymakers, and other scientists, have to be balanced in medical research in particular, and these components as well make this kind of research different from the work that we see in other articles, in other research. So this is important, and this is our starting point for our discussions today. The other thing that we do see in medical and healthcare research, lots more different kinds of articles that you could write. Research papers, scientific reports, case studies, clinical reports, drug discovery reports, as well as trials and interventions. And at Bentham, we publish all of these different kinds of articles. We'd be delighted to talk more to you about how we can help you or help your researchers get your work published, get your research published, if that's of interest. So something that I do with Bentham all the time is talk to researchers about how we can help them publish their research. So if that's of interest to you and you're listening to this, do reach out to Nadia, do get in touch with the team. We'd love to learn more about your research and how we can help you get your research published. So much busier, lots more information, a rapidly changing field, research articles that need to be pitched to a much larger range of potential audiences, the public as well as researchers and policymakers, and different kinds of articles out there as well. These topics, these issues, all contribute to make medical research different to other kinds of science and technology research. So as a medical writer, as a medical researcher, you're also not just limiting yourself to a career in research. And as you can see here, there's lots of different
Apologies.
there's lots of different ways that you can get your research published. There's lots of different pathways that you could follow to get your research published as a medical researcher. And we're also available to help with, career guidance. We're also here to help if that is something that you need support with as well in the future. So let's think about what we're going to discuss in this presentation. We're going to talk quickly about three things, three interrelated concepts in our presentation today. We're going to talk about getting started to write, a few tricks and tips for success. We're also going to think about what comes first in a medical article, in a medical research article, and that's your data and how to present your data. And then also ethics, because there are a number of particular medical issues that we need to consider when putting research articles together in the medical and health sciences. So these are the three topics that we're going to talk about today, beginning with what to think about before you start to write. Preparing a medical abstract, let's think about what your message is. Remember that I mentioned that more than just researchers, clinicians will be reading your work. What is the take-home message of your study? And this is a very important trick to develop in all scientific writing, in all academic writing, having in mind the takeaway message, having in mind what it is that you want people reading your article to get out of that experience. What's the key thing that you want people to learn from your article, the key takeaway? And broadening that out beyond just your own particular research area is also very important. If you have a clear message that's going to be interesting to a broad range of people engaging with your research, then that will help you to be more effective. So starting to write, you check the original nature of your results, the story, the takeaway. Why is your work new and interesting? And how does your work relate to a currently hot topic? What's new and challenging? How does your paper, how does your research provide others with a solution to a difficult problem? What's new and challenging, for example? It's all in the story, as we'll talk about, and as we've already started to discuss. Having a clear message with your research paper is one of the key tricks, actually, to getting your work published in higher impact factor journals, being broadly applicable, having something that will be interesting to lots of different researchers. So before you start to write, I do encourage you to sit down and think about what your message is and try to assemble that into just one or two sentences before you get going, because that will help you both write the cover letter, pitch your article as a pre-submission inquiry to a leading medical journal, and also write the paper when it comes time to do that as well. It's all in the story. Also, excuse me, before starting to write, it's very important to have a target journal in mind. So do think about that as well. I always like to say that there are three things to think about before starting to write your message, as we've already talked about, your audience, and that's going to be your target journal, and the structure of your writing. Message, audience, and structure will help you immeasurably as you get going and you start to think about how to put your article together. So you've collected your data, you've prepared your data, you know what the takeaway is from that data, you know what the message is from that data. Which journal are you going to select? Make a list, aim high. Rank your journals by impact factor, and you can pitch your work to journals preferentially with higher impact factors and then move down that tree, that list that you've developed as a researcher. Aiming high, choosing appropriately, and of course, at Bentham Science, we are here to help you learn to sell and manage your research submission. Again, if you need any help with journal selection, we are here to assist you because your target journals influence your writing style, of course. And this is one of the key questions that researchers often have. How much information to put into the different sections of my paper? What goes in the introduction? How to write the abstract? Which keywords to pick? What goes in the methods? How to structure the results and discussion? If you have a target journal in mind before you begin to write, then many, if not all, of these questions are answered for you at the beginning of the writing process. Message, audience, that's your target journal, and structure are key in academic writing, but especially in medical writing if you wish to save time with your articles. So, moving on swiftly, we do like to think about the shape of a standard clinical research paper in the following terms. And this is the famous IMRAD academic article structure, IMRAD, introduction, methods, results, and discussion. We've got the title, we've got the abstract and those keywords, and then the body text of the paper. And I do encourage you as well, once you've picked your target journal, spend a good deal of time thinking initially, once you have your message, of course, what will your title be and how will you structure the shape of your abstract? Because these are often, as you probably know, the first bits of an article submitted to a journal that a peer reviewer or an editor will read. And often, indeed, they do tend to make their decisions based initially on what they see in the title and in the abstract. Many researchers, of course, write these sections in a big rush at the end of the project, but being effective with a great title, keep it short, keep it succinct, don't give away the outcome of your clinical trial, of your research project. That wouldn't be what many medical journals are looking for. They're looking for what we call non-declarative titles, but this gives you an overview, the general shape of a research article. What goes into a title? As I've already mentioned, the fewest possible words to adequately describe the contents of the study. Keep your title short. In medical writing, the main issue. The subject. Be accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete. No infrequently used abbreviations. Get people interested. The readership of your article is certainly going to be more than just research clinicians. You want to attract people. You want to get them interested in reading your work. And in fact, in medical research, in health sciences research, it's been shown if your title is less than 7 words in length, it's likely to garner more citations. So definitely keep that in mind as well. We will be looking at structure. The structure of medical papers. It's so important that readers have a story, where they are from, where they are now, where they're going. That plot is needed. A paper is a story. So where does that structure come from? It comes from your target journal. It comes from the journal that you've decided to pitch this article to as a piece of research. So don't start to write until you have your structure in place, your message, your audience, and your structure. If you forget everything else that we talk about in this presentation today, I would love it if you would remember that key piece of information, things to think about before you start to write: message, audience, and structure. So we'll move on and think about what we have to have in place to begin with when we put together a medical article, a clinical piece of research. And that, of course, is your data. And I won't read this out because it's pretty basic, but let's just start off by thinking what your data could be. Well, it could be qualitative or it could be quantitative, of course. We encounter lots of medical researchers all the time who experience difficulties planning their research projects with ethics in mind. We also encounter lots of medical researchers who experience difficulties planning their research projects if the data they plan to collect is going to be qualitative. Very common in health science research, survey-based information. So if that's something that you're struggling with, if that's something that you'd like more training, more information about, then do get in touch with us. We'd love to learn more about your issues. We'd love to potentially provide more training on this particular topic. Data, what is that? And what is the way in which you are going to be able to manage this in your research writing? So data and presentation of that data as a starting point for medical writing is our next topic. And of course, again, I won't read this out, but everybody listening to this, of course, is very well aware that the statistics that you might perform on a data set in a quantitative analysis is not the same as how you then present that to get your message across, to get your story across. And of course, we'll give you all of these slides. You'll have access to the recording of this, so you can have a look at these pieces of information a little bit later on if there's anything in here that you find. Forgive me, I'm a little bit sick, so I need to mute myself for a moment there. We will be talking then about sampling, ordinal and continuous data. Remember, I talked already about qualitative analyses versus quantitative variables. And if I mentioned already, if you have an issue with qualitative analysis, then do get in touch with us, because we are running separate courses on this that I think would be potentially important if you have like a research group or a research team that would like to participate in this kind of training. So we would love to hear more from you if that is something that is of interest. We also teach about summary statistics. We have training courses on this. We spend a lot of time working with researchers, helping them with their statistics, helping them build their analyses from the ground up, how to summarize your observations and which kinds of statistical analyses to build into your research from the outset, and how to understand how to build and plan a research project from the beginning to the end. And of course, before you begin a research project, before you begin that data collection, you will of course have thought about the kinds of analyses that you will be performing based on the kind of data that you will be collecting, and presenting that data to your audience to get your message across is absolutely key. So what we've put together is a number of quick tips in this area for more effective data presentation. There's a fantastic paper that was published in 2014, 10 years ago now. I know, amazing, that talks us through the 10 simple rules for better figures. And of course, rule number 1 is know your audience. And you can see this here. If I'm presenting data on cancer, my audience, as an example, is dependent. It's going to be really important, like what I'm talking about, depending on my audience. And the simple example here that we're providing is that in the situation where there are certain sex-specific cancers, we would not be presenting that data if we're talking about that data to men, to that particular gender group, for example. So my audience, my target audience, is very important as I start to present my data to that audience. So rule number 1 for effective figure presentation, effective data presentation, is of course knowing your audience and then identifying what your message is. And we talked about this already. Before you begin the writing process, thinking about who your audience are, who you are talking to with your data. So rule number 2 is identify your message. We also encourage you, of course, to adapt to the medium. Which kind of medium are you using? If it's a presentation at a conference or on a slide, then the way that you present your data might be different to the way that you might present your data in a research article, especially if the figure that you're ending up creating is not going to be in color. Let's think about that as well. Rule number 3, adapt to the medium. Your captions, your figure captions are absolutely critical. Have a look at papers in Nature healthcare journals, in Nature Medicine, for example, because they have an absolutely fantastic approach to captioning research articles. The caption is standalone. Everything is encapsulated there in the figure caption that allows you, the reader, to understand what's happening in the figure. You don't need to read the rest of the article. And that's important because actually, many researchers download just figures. They don't download the entirety of research articles. They just pull down the figure and look at the figure. So you need to have effective captions, especially in medical research. And I would also encourage you, and this happened to me a lot in my research career, get your hands on a piece of figure creation software that you are comfortable using. Don't be pushed in a particular direction by research colleagues. Very important that the figures that you make, the figures that you create for your own research, represent your personality. So when people look back at your body of work, they recognize it as being from you. So captions and software and the use of color. Don't forget that many people will not be able, in the way that you are, to engage with color. So the way that you use color in your research articles is particularly critical. Many journals, I work for one at the moment, do not print much of their final issue content in color. Amazing, I know. In this day and age, some people still get paper copies of journals mailed to their libraries. So have that in mind as well, how you present your data, how you use color effectively. And don't be misleading. It's very important as you put your articles together and you plan and develop your statistical analyses, but the way you present your research outcomes, the way that you present your research results is not misleading. Have a look at these two examples with relative disk area or relative disk radius. And you can see that the way that this gives a message to your audience about change over time, change over size, is misleading. So don't be misleading. Be ethical in the way that you present your data to other researchers. And I would also say avoiding junk in your figures. It's definitely the case that this is some data that could have been collected, but how should it be presented? I've got 7 data series here. Will I present those as a massive jumble of colored lines, or will I split them up, present them in black and white, and provide my readers with what is a much easier to understand and interpret figure? This is important. And the way that you put your figures together, the way that you present your figures to your audience is critical, especially in pharmaceutical and medical research. So, having talked about what you should know about before you start to write and the different things that make medical writing so important and so unique as a field of research writing, we've also talked a little bit about data presentation. And all of these topics, by the way, just a taster of the kind of content that we can provide via Bentham Science to you as researchers if you'd like to get in touch with us and you'd like to learn more. Finally, in the third part of this presentation today, I will just briefly mention a little bit about medical ethics. The law informs you what you must do and what you must not do. And ethics, of course, helps you to decide what you ought to do when the law is silent, including in published research work. But medical research is subject to particular sets of ethics. And if you need access to the kinds of checklists that have been produced in medical research, and we can provide you with access to all of that content as well, so you can accurately and carefully plan your next research project. Publication ethics are critically important. The ethical review of human subjects. Studies must be subject to the highest standards of integrity, but we still need a free marketplace of ideas. And we see these ethical issues all the time. Some examples here from China for your perusal in this presentation. Research that's done that's not accepted by the international community because certain ethical ground rules have not been met can create issues. So I would encourage you to look at the way you collaborate, the way that you write up and submit research articles, and also what happens after your articles are published. And if you feel that you need more training, the week after next, by the way, is International Research Integrity Week. So that would be absolutely fantastic if we could come back and do a longer training session, perhaps at your university or at your institution, giving your researchers all of the information they need to understand research and publication ethics before, during, and after a research project is planned and written up for publication. There's a lot to get into here, which we don't have a lot of time to talk about today, but we are seeing a massive increase in the number of issues, ethical issues being reported to publishing companies. Very well publicized breaches, news reports that focus on research fraud, as well as issues around conflicts of interest. Do have a look at the ICMJE, the International Committee Medical Journal Editors. National Institute for Health has an Office of Research Integrity, as well as the Committee on Publication Ethics. So we understand within the publishing industry that more work is needed, but we're also at Bentham at the forefront of helping authors understand how they can navigate the ethical landscape as they put their research together, because you don't want to end up publishing something that ends up getting retracted. And you can see here on this slide just how that has broken down over the course of a period of time based on data coming out of PubMed. And you'll of course have access to all of these slides at the end of the presentation. But medical ethics and breaches of medical ethics generate headlines, as you can see here, and you do not want your research to be anywhere near the news. So it's well worth spending some time working with us, understanding what you need to do as you start to build a medical health science research project, as you start to build that, as you start to develop your data collection, and as you then start to go on and write that up and submit that to a medical journal. Because if you don't have certain things in place before you start, conflicts of interest statements, ethics statements, registration of clinical trials, for example, you will not be able to get your work published. And that, of course, can be a huge issue, especially if you've done the work, spent a lot of money, done a lot of interviews or trials with patients, and then you can't get the work published. So do get in touch with us. We have all the information you need to prepare your researchers for effective medical research and medical writing. I believe that better education in this area is absolutely critical, because we have guidelines, we have assessment criteria, and you are able to use things like preprint platforms and preclinical trial registration services to make sure that people are aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it long before you get to the publication stage, so people can come back to you and provide input and thoughts on what is happening. So with that, because I'm losing my voice, I will draw this to a close, but thank you so much for listening. We've talked about starting to write. We've talked about what's first in a medical paper, and we've talked also about how you can at least start the process of thinking about ethics in your research. And if you'd like to learn more, and if you'd like us to give longer, more detailed, in-depth presentations on any of these topics, specifically geared towards your particular research area, do get in touch with me or Nadia.